So, for the very first time on the channel, we're going to be debunking a theory, one that I believe has gotten completely out of control within the Invincible fandom, and has been spreading a lot of misinformation, and today I'm here to correct that. That is the Invincible Adrenaline theory. Hello, my name's Taken, and I like talking about anime and cartoons and all aspects of the entertainment industry. If that interests you, please leave a like and subscribe. You might be wondering, what is the Adrenaline theory? And I'll gladly explain. The Adrenaline theory is a fan-made theory proposed by the community that was later rejected by the series creator, Robert Kirkman. The theory was created to explain Invincible's poor power scaling and inconsistencies, providing an in-universe explanation for why Mark seems to struggle against Earth-born threats while still being able to keep up with stronger Viltrumites. The theory hinges on the idea that Mark has a biological edge over every other Viltrumite because of his human lineage. This will make him the only Viltrumite with access to adrenaline, meaning that whenever he experiences a near-death situation in a fight, he gets a sudden boost in performance as a survival mechanism. The theory presupposes that as a warrior race to be the universe's essential apex predator, Viltrumites don't have access to adrenaline. The theory was accepted by fans after Nolan's explanation of how Mark defeated Conquest in their second fight. Nolan explained the only reason Mark was able to win that fight was because of the fact that he was running on adrenaline. Now, this theory makes sense if you don't fully understand the series, and that's fine because that's why I'm here. But I also want to talk about why the community feels so confident in this theory. It seems to me the main reason people believe in this theory so much is because of the concerns about the writing inconsistencies in the show. For example, like I said earlier, Mark is regularly shown struggling against supervillains on Earth while also similarly going toe-to-toe with some of the strongest fighters in the known universe, aka the Viltrumites. But that could be easily explained without relying on this dumb theory, and in my opinion, it actually creates more plot holes than it actually solves. So, does Invincible have bad power scaling? No. From what I can tell, it's pretty consistent with the overall narrative that Robert Kirkman is trying to convey, because like it or not, Invincible is a story first. Instead of looking at it like a death battle video, you should look at it as a story that's trying to deliver a message. And with that perspective, everything becomes much clearer. The reason I'm bringing up power scaling is because when discussing this theory, when Robert Kirkman was on the Invincible podcast channel, he kind of dissed the entire community of power scalers.
Power scaling annoys me.
Yeah.
Base is gonna eat me alive for that, but it's like, well, I think Alan is stronger because Alan did this. Actually, I think Omni-Man's stronger because it is. No, it depends on like the circumstances in the fight.
It's a clip in which we'll be breaking down later in this video. With that said, the idea of poor power scaling often leads to people to call Invincible poorly written. This has caused part of the community to seemingly dunk on the series creator, Robert Kirkman, claiming that he has too much of an ego and should just accept the theory as some form of saving grace from the fans.
Robert Kirkman doesn't like the adrenaline theory because of his ego. His ego cannot handle the fact that the fans came up with a plausible explanation that actually makes sense to resolve the plot hole of Mark's strength inconsistencies.
But that's extremely problematic because he's the one who created the story, the plot, and the characters. Within this context, we as the viewers don't know more than him, especially when it comes to his own work. As a person who was part of the power scaling community back in 2020, when I was trying to get into debating, I quickly realized that power scaling often boils down to a sport of proving an argument and honestly discussing which characters will win in a fight. That makes sense since debating is a skill based on practice, not necessarily on the validity or truth of what you're arguing for. Because of this, a lot of power scalers I've interacted with rarely tries to incorporate narrative purpose or author's intent when describing why they believe a character is strong to begin with, which leads people to bringing up out of context scenes or panels. By all means, this is still considered bad habits within the community, but it still happens and it gets frustrating. As a writer, I can understand why that becomes annoying since your priority is writing a story, while a power scaler's priority is simply determining which characters win in a fight. Keep in mind, I do think these two concepts have to coexist. As a writer, it's your job to explain why certain events happen in a coherent way. This means that when writing an action show, a character winning a fight still has to make narrative sense to the viewer. But when Kirkman says he doesn't like power scaling, I think he's referring to the annoying side of it. The people who overlook the show's plot and hyper-analyze the smallest detail, not the ones who generally discusses how certain characters will interact or perform in a fight. And if people are generally confused about the inverse scaling of Invincible, that's fine, but attacking the creator and claiming he doesn't know anything, I feel like that gets us nowhere as a community. And I feel like it also undermines the entire story. So let's get into this theory and its many flaws. Now the conversation around the theory kinda plot got blown out of proportion when it was discovered at Kirkman around last year on the Invincible podcast channel, which I'll link down below since I haven't seen many people give them the credit for their clips, addressed and pushed back on the theory. In that discussion, the show's creator Robert Kirkman effectively debunked it, which led to some fans disagree with him and his stances on power scaling. When one of the hosts asked Kirkman about his thoughts on the theory before, he initially seemed confused by the question.
Sick fun. I have so there's this like viral debate going around, and I don't know where it came from, except someone posted a picture of the panel in which I think it was inspired by, and it's, do Viltrumites have adrenaline? And is Mark a stronger Viltrumite because he has adrenaline?
Have you heard about this?
Have you seen this anywhere?
I don't understand these questions.
This led him to explain his general stance on power scaling instead. Because of that, the entire conversation about Robert Kirkman hating on power scalers or being anti-power scaling really came from a misunderstanding, in which Robert Kirkman later clarified his position on the topic.
Any fight can have any kind of result.
Yeah.
Power scaling doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
So I think people get hung up on these specific things, and I love the investment. I love that people care about the characters and they want to know more. But when people ask questions like that, I'm just like, I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think you wrote it because like it was after.
Oh, is there
like,
dialogue that talks about?
There's dialogue there's dialogue in the comic that talks about it later on after a fight.
In which case, yeah.
Mark says, "I can't believe I beat him. I thought he was stronger than me." And Nolan says, "Well, you had adrenaline
On your side.
on your side."
Yeah.
I think it was like adrenaline and rage or something like that. So
Yeah, and that's just in general. That doesn't mean
yeah, I agree with you.
All right. Okay. I completely understand the question now. I apologize. I can't all back.
But with this misunderstanding, we did get to see Kirkman's personal philosophy on how he wants to construct his shows, which is based on contextual situation of each fight within the series. Kirkman sees the binary aspect of power scaling as being too narrowly restrictive. The whole idea of if character C loses to character B, but character A beats B, then character A must automatically beat C is something that he entirely rejects, because he believes there are outside factors beyond who's just simply stronger, faster, or smarter, such as who is more emotionally invested, a character's mental state, or any other contextual factors. And I think this is where people's confusion came in regarding where Mark fits in it, because they are not incorporating the context in which Mark is losing or winning. And this theory is exactly that, the result of fans not properly incorporating the full narrative aspects of the show. So my main issue with the adrenaline theory is that none of you niggas know what adrenaline actually is. As stated by the Cleveland Clinic, adrenaline is a hormone your adrenaline glands produce to help you prepare for stressful or dangerous situations. An adrenaline rush refers to the quick release of adrenaline into your bloodstream. The process prepares your body for a fight or flight response. This fight or flight response is where a lot of people get tripped up. Some believe that dominant or apex predators wouldn't need this survival mechanism since they wouldn't have evolved the purpose to use it. And that's not how it works, because adrenaline is released in stressful situations, which can include life or death experiences but isn't limited to them. It can also occur during panic attacks or even other stressful situations like at work or even taking a test at school. It's a response mechanism, not something inherently designed to be this human superpower, and is not even limited to humans, because all vertebrates including mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish produces adrenaline. So that fish guy who Omni-Man killed, he was producing adrenaline when he saw Omni-Man attacking them. Adrenaline is only produced to manage stress and fuel the fight or flight response, as stated by Jen Gale. Adrenaline is a biological mechanism shared across vertebrate species. What does that mean? Since Viltrumites are still biological beings despite being aliens, they would clearly be classified as vertebrates and mammals. So it wouldn't make sense for them to not have this in their biology. And this is what Kirkman was referring to in that clip.
Right.
I get these questions and I'm just like, what?
I don't understand.
Is there like some kind of biology lesson that I missed that like adrenaline is unique to humans in the animal world? And
Thank you.
I don't
Yep.
know why adrenaline would be,
Yeah.
don't understand that.
Keep in mind that one of the only requirements for an animal to possess adrenaline is being considered a vertebrate. Apex predators like lions and polar bears also have it here on Earth. Therefore, Viltrumites, despite being really strong and powerful, it will still make logical sense for them to have this as part of their biology. Why? Because Viltrumites are essentially a human-like species with a specific set of innate abilities such as flight, enhanced durability, super strength, and speed, along with several other powers. Let's not forget that the theory really falls apart when you look at the explanation that Viltrumite DNA is so pure and aggressive and dominant that any hybrid will eventually become a full-blooded Viltrumite over time. Mark was considered to be nearly full-blooded by Nolan back in season 1.
Viltrumite DNA is so pure, you're nearly full-blooded.
Meaning that by season 4, he's even less human than before while also becoming stronger than ever. That is not a coincidence. And when we look at Oliver, someone who isn't even human, we can see how aggressive Viltrumite DNA is, as it is currently coexisting with his Thraxan DNA, which accelerate his aging, while also amplifying the effects of his Viltrumite traits to a point that his non-Viltrumite biology is becoming less relevant. This will ultimately suggest that, similar to Mark, Oliver will become a full-blooded Viltrumite later in his life. Not only does this theory not work, but Viltrumites logically should have adrenaline anyways. On top of that, Mark isn't getting anything particularly useful from his human lineage from a biological standpoint. If this theory was true, Mark should have beaten Nolan back in Chicago, or at least put up a better fight, since at that point in the series, he's arguably the most human and would have supposedly gained the most from his adrenaline response. But that's not what happened. Another thing that debunks this theory entirely is the Invincible War, where we see a bunch of alternate marks ravaging the planet. If the adrenaline theory makes so much sense and is so infallible, please explain how some variants was able to be killed by characters like Powerplex and Check Jacket in a 1v1 encounter. If the adrenaline theory is supposed to be the saving grace made by the fans to give Robert Kirkman a cop-out, then why didn't any of these variants experience this adrenaline rush that Mark is supposed to get while being a quote-unquote half-blooded Viltrumite? Like I said before, the theory raises more questions than it answers. So we talked about the theory, the creators' thoughts on it, the fans' response to the creators' pushback, and what adrenaline really is, and why Viltrumites most definitely have it. Another aspect of this conversation I need to address is the fight between Mark and Conquest, since this fight seems to be the very backbone of this entire theory/conversation. Like I said before, Kirkman has a different way of presenting his fights with an Invincible. He likes to incorporate outside factors that people tend not to consider within power scaling discussion.
Could Omni-Man fight against Alan? It depends on like what mood they're in and
what are they fighting for.
Like Alan could be technically stronger than Omni-Man and still lose a fight because the fight's more important to him, or you know, something happened over the course of the fight that is weakening Alan. Like power scaling is, in my opinion, it's just like writing story by chart. Like that's not how that works. Well, the Thing is actually stronger than Thor. Actually, I think Thor is technically stronger than Hulk, but like, or technically stronger than the Thing.
And this is best displayed in both Conquest and Mark's fight. Let me ask a question. Who's stronger right now at their peak within the story so far? Mark or Conquest? If you said Mark because he killed Conquest, you're wrong. Because in Kirkman's story, he uses a different approach to storytelling that allows weaker characters to defeat stronger ones based on the specific circumstances of the fight. Conquest, for all intents and purposes, is one of the strongest Viltrumites right now, arguably second only to Thrag. The reason Conquest lost in both fights comes down to an aspect of his character archetype that people tend to overlook. Conquest, by design, is a character who simply enjoys the thrill of fighting and sees it almost like a game. Because he's so strong, he often doesn't take his opponent seriously. In that way, he's a lot similar to characters like Kenpachi Zaraki from Bleach, both being absurdly powerful while also enjoying prolonging fights for their entertainment. We know this is the case with Conquest because he directly says it to Mark as he's treating the fight between them like his golden opportunity to sit back and go all out, essentially treating Mark like a toy. Both fights were nothing more than a game to him, while Mark in both confrontation treated them with the utmost seriousness, and that's ultimately became Conquest's downfall. He underestimated Mark and his allies, always thinking he had the upper hand without realizing how resilient Mark really was until it was too late. The first half of their first first fight, Conquest was egging Mark to do better, in which he did. But we need to understand why Mark seems to be playing up to his opponent. Why is Mark struggling against people on Earth but simply fights better against stronger enemies? Let's understand this. Mark is the strongest person on Earth, not counting other foreign aliens that exist. Why is the most powerful person on Earth struggling throughout the entire series? The simple answer is that he's holding back. That's all it is. After the tragedy in Chicago, Mark is not only trying to prove something to himself, but also to the world that he's nothing like Omni-Man. This is why we see Mark struggling with the ethics of killing his enemies for the greater good, a theme the show is constantly emphasizing. Should Mark take the authoritarian stance of deciding when to end someone's life? We see this conflict when Mark thinks he should kill Angstrom, or when he's considering killing Dinosaurus. This fits within the theme of Mark not trying to be like his dad, who was so inconceivably strong at that point in the series that he found no trouble simply ending human life. This is a level of power Mark as a Viltrumite possess, and it's a power that scares him. And him not killing is a fundamental flaw within his fighting style, as noted by Omni-Man under Fight on Thraxa, when he tells him that if he's not fighting to kill, he's essentially fighting to lose.
Mark, what are you doing? She's tearing you apart!
Yeah, I noticed.
You're fighting like you're on Earth. This is different. Stop holding back, or you're gonna get us both killed.
I'm not holding back.
Yes, you are! She's trying to kill you, Mark. If you're not trying to kill her, you're going to die. Don't think, act. You need to fight like a Viltrumite.
No, I don't kill people.
If you don't do this, we're all dead. You, me, your brother, and every single Thraxan on this planet.
Look at Oliver's fight against the Mauler twins and compare it to Mark's fight. Oliver had killing intent and was more than capable of easily defeating them, while Mark, yes, was getting jumped, he still struggled even though he was outnumbered. But let's be honest, if Mark really wanted to, he could easily killed every variant of the Mauler twins right then and there, but he chose not to. That's why it's so important when Conquest first arrived, Mark explains how he just wants to hit something or someone as hard as he possibly can and takes the fight head on. And while the majority of the community agrees that Conquest's defeat in the first fight was essentially a team effort with the help of Eve and Oliver, we're gonna have to talk about round 2. We have to understand the contextual build-up to the fight from both Conquest and Mark's perspective. From Mark's side, he sees Conquest as someone who put him through as much trauma as his father did, along with everything else he has already experienced on Earth. This already puts Mark in a highly stressed state, which would naturally result in him producing adrenaline throughout his body, as I explained before. It's also fair to note that Mark has been gradually getting stronger throughout the entire series, meaning that as of right now, this is the strongest he has ever been and is more relative to Conquest in both speed and strength. We also see in the comics, in preparation for writing this script, I decided to reread the fight between Mark and Conquest, where Conquest explains that Mark is almost as strong as Omni-Man, who's already relative to Conquest in terms of power. So at this point, Mark is finally fighting within his own range. And let's look at Conquest's perspective. From his point of view, Mark is a bitch that he doesn't take seriously. Think about it. He shows up on Earth, killed thousands of people, nearly killed Mark, his brother, and his girlfriend just to be spared. Conquest genuinely believes Mark kept them alive. We know that's not the case, but he doesn't. We have to understand that Viltrumite culture is built around violence and dominance, so sparing your enemy is seen as one of the biggest signs of weakness a Viltrumite can commit. So again, Conquest has no real reason to believe Mark posed an actual threat to him, since he won't kill him. And that right there was Conquest's biggest mistake in that entire fight. He was playing around with Nolan, Oliver, and Mark, thinking he already won. As Oliver took a break to go to another planet in the middle of the fight, Conquest took his eyes off of Mark. He literally took his eyes off the prize, and Mark used that moment to his advantage. In the comic, comics, it is actually implied when Conquest arrives on that planet, he also took time to breathe and assess the situation, thinking he's in no real danger. So when Mark slams him into the ground, he quite literally took the air out of his lungs, which is why Mark decides to choke this nigga out. His game plan wasn't portrayed as clearly in the show, but the point still remains the same either way. Mark, who is relatively close to Conquest in power, is finally willingly taking the chance to actually kill him by suffocating him out. With Mark being determined to finish the job this time, Conquest treated this entire situation as a joke, acting like it was a game of chicken. He believed Mark posed no real threat, and because of his ego, he expected Mark to eventually let go. That's why Conquest spent most of his time flying around, trying to shake off Mark and punching him away. It isn't until Mark refused to let go that Conquest realizes he's actually losing oxygen, and as a last-ditch effort, he brutally attacked Mark and attempt to make him let go. However, Mark still doesn't let go because he's far more emotionally invested in the fight, allowing him to outperform Conquest in that moment. And while Conquest is still physically stronger, it was already too late for him to recover and change the course of the fight. That's why when Nolan explains Mark having adrenaline as a factor, he is speaking in a general sense. He recognizes that Mark is fighting with rage and adrenaline, and as we know for a fact, Viltrumite also experiences rage and other emotional response. This was Kirkman's explanation after clarifying the question. Once he realized people were referring to the literal interpretation of the dialogue he wrote for Omni-Man, this statement was never meant to be taken as literally or as strictly as many people interpret it to be.
He was just referring to adrenaline and what's he say, rage in general. He was not saying that Mark is unique in that he has human adrenaline. Totally fair question. Totally fair question.
But that goes back to what you were saying. That's the context of the fight for Mark, and that's what he in that context, and that's why he won. Yeah.
You wrote it in that context, in that like it made perfect sense. But people, I think like us, like they got hung up on like that cloned monster that touched that person's hand in Telestria, and then all of a sudden turned into him, and we're like, what the fuck is this? And same thing.
Yeah. Well. I think it's basically like a sports thing where they'll say this team was hungrier, this team wanted it more. Mark can beat Conquest because Conquest is coming at this as I'm the most powerful Viltrumite. I do this all the time. I'm just going to do my normal everyday thing that I always do and beat the crap out of this person and possibly kill them. But then Mark is, he has the weight of the world on his shoulders and he's out there defending Earth and he has these emotional feelings against Conquest that are driving him to put in more effort and fight harder. And so that's how a weaker opponent can somehow overcome. Yeah, a lot of people are like, well, Mark beat Conquest, so he's a stronger Viltrumite. I don't know. I don't think so.
What really upsets me about this theory, how it totally undermines the narrative opponents of Mark actually beating Conquest. Because of Conquest's new dialogue in the animated series, referencing his I am so lonely speech, the show goes above and beyond, fleshing him out as a character and makes him more than just a hurdle that Mark has to get through, while also developing the ideological significance of the Viltrumite Empire. Someone like Conquest should be praised. He should be treated second only to Thrag, but instead the opposite happens. Because of his strength, he's isolated due to his cruel nature. The other Viltrumites view him as lesser, even though he acts this way for them for the betterment of their entire civilization. In the end, he is disregarded as nothing more than a mere tool or instrument of destruction. This shows us, the viewers, the deep cultural conditioning that all Viltrumites have gone through. To some extent, they must inherently know that what they're doing is wrong, which leads to a situation like the one we see with Conquest as a person who fully embodies what it means to be a Viltrumite, and in contrast, we have Mark, who is ontologically the antithesis of what it means to be one. Where the average Viltrumite is overly violent and cruel and doesn't value sentient foreign life while disregarding intimate relationships and connections, Mark does. And that's something we see him catch criticism for all the time, especially when he's being compared to other members of his species. But as the series moves in a certain direction, we can tell that because Mark values human life and forms close, intimate bonds with his friends and family, that's what makes him stronger. That's his true reason to fight. And and we see these two ideologies clash metaphysically within Mark vs. Conquest. The main reason Conquest lost both fights is that he simply didn't understand or value Mark's human connections. It was Eve's love and devotion to helping Mark that led them to victory, and it was also Mark's determination to protect Oliver that contribute to Conquest's eventual defeat. The adrenaline theory was based on contributing Mark's strength to his human biology, which isn't the case. Mark wins these fights not because he's human in the physical sense, but he was raised to be human. To give credit when it's due, it was Debbie's strong influence on her family that caused Nolan to start questioning his Viltrumite brainwashing. It's also the reason our Mark seems to be the only good Invincible variant among the literal infinite possible universes, and the reason Oliver has grown into a proper, capable hero because of Debbie's human nature and foundation. Not only Earth, but potentially the entire universe has a fighting chance against the Viltrumite Empire. So in a way, Mark being human does play a role, but not in the way people expected it to be. And the last thing I want to talk about Conquest vs. Mark is how that entire fight proves one thing. Despite the running gag of Mark getting absolutely brutalized, even though his name is literally Invincible, Mark is kind of invincible. Despite the broken bones and physical and mental trauma he goes through, his body might get damaged from time to time, but his fighting spirit is what remains constant throughout the entire show. That is what I believe makes him truly invincible. Mark is put in a position where he doesn't want to win, he simply has to in order to protect the people he cares about, the people he loves, and the planet he only knows as home. Mark has a lot more on the line, and that allows him to reach a higher level, and I think that's beautiful, and that's why I love Invincible so much. But we're nearing the end, and if you stayed, make sure to like and comment, and if you're new here, please subscribe. I'm your host Taken, and we do a little reviewing around here. Peace out.